Thank you for getting up early this morning. The future of our first session is, does the collaborative economy still have a future? That sounds a bit like a doomsday sentence. We have just a little half hour together, so let's focus on the collaborative economy. It's raining outside. Arthur is one of the co-founders of OuiShare, which is a think tank on the collaborative economy. It started in France, and this is the kind of thing that's spreading abroad. So let's look at things from a French and international stance. A couple of months ago, you worried the social network. There were all sorts of titles and articles where you announced the death of the collaborative economy. You said it's over. At the very time when the traditional press challenged Les Echos, we're celebrating the triumph of the collaborative economy. Are you more intelligent than the headlines of the leading newspapers? That's tough to answer that kind of a question early in the morning. What about the challenge? Recently, I saw a study which announced collaborative economy plus 2,000% in the next couple of years. I don't really understand what that means. It wasn't sort of a way of announcing things. Both I and a number of colleagues felt this way. We were trying to say that, quite frankly, we can't do as though there was a big general movement, a big wave, which would replace the horrible conventional economy. It wasn't a way of saying that the time in the playground was over. Collaborative economy covers many things. It wasn't a way of saying that all this would disappear. There are ongoing changes, but we felt that we couldn't give them just a huge label and put everything under this heading. You're going to be talking about active consumers or discerning consumers later on. We don't think that all this is going to create a new economic paradigm that will replace the conventional economy. What is the collaborative economy, in fact? It was a sort of a wave of hope. It was something that gave rise to quite a lot of enthusiasm. It was a way of saying, well, alongside the traditional capitalistic economy, there's something else there. There's a sort of a future paradise on Earth that's taking shape. It's the kind of thing that Rifkin and others have talked about. I like Rifkin, but sometimes he's fairly scientific compared with Jules Verne, who thought about conquering space. After 2015, 2016, well, it's hard to say that a wonderful world is unfolding. I have the impression that things are much more complicated than that. If there are such big gaps between your vision of the collaborative economy, which has no reason to exist, and others who say there's going to be plus 2,000% growth or challenge. You have social and solidarity-based economy, for example. People are saying, well, here we are, we exist. The Crédit Agricole, the Caisse d'Épargne, even if there's the Greek subprime, are delving into this area. For the collaborative economy, you have Airbnb and Uber. There is a real collaborative economy, in other words, but if we limit ourselves to that, it will still amount to peanuts in 2016. How do you distinguish between the good collaborative economy and the bad? Because look at Uber. It's a company that really works. We've been talking about it for quite some time, but that shows that the concept is very fragmented. We've been talking about the collaborative economy for quite some time now. When you try to talk about an example, you talk about Uberization. There are some quick successes, and there are other projects that are just not taking off and are shriveling because the platform model is very complicated to use. But I don't think there's a good or a bad collaborative economy. For me, it's a composite concept. It's a sort of a challenge, a wager. At the time, I thought, okay, there's a new system which is taking shape. I didn't try to say I wasn't striving at some virtuous alternative economy that we'd set up in our little corner. What I wanted to do was to look at the potential systemic impact. And I have the impression that the collaborative economy created a good synergy between the big people like Uber and smaller entities which were more pure in their approach and which enjoyed being in the limelight thanks to Uber, because people were saying, wow, this is great, it heralds a major movement, yet most of these projects are not really developing. The idea was to focus more on the social dimension also of these giant platforms which were really doing well. It seemed to be a movement where everyone was moving forward at the same speed, had a shared interest, but that's not actually true. So we'll use other words. There are other ways of talking about the sharing economy. Collaborative economy, that wave was so quick that no one wanted to miss out on it. Not the conventional companies became collaborative. They organized collaborative fests, entrepreneur fests, banks have become collaborative overnight. It was a very strong movement. Casto and Le Roi Merlin also wanted to jump on the bandwagon. Do you think companies are really going to move towards co-production? Will there really be a big change? Well, it depends on the sector. For OuiShare, we don't believe that we can have a sort of a portmanteau term. We need to look at what's happening in each sector. Mobility, for example, people are keenly interested in the idea of decentralization, the decentralization of economic structures, blockchains, and so on. So other people are looking at the organization of labor. There are companies which are introducing more collaborative changes, but I'm not really in there. I don't know how real things are. I think that the main thing is that this calls into question some of the established models. Castorama, well, their move to become more collaborative isn't absurd by any means. Castor, Airbnb, I use Airbnb. I like it. I think okay, it's a problem in many cities. There's a bit of a conflict. Look at Barcelona. And there's a boomerang effect to a degree. This has created a kind of mass tourism which bothers the local inhabitants, but it's something that I use myself. But I'm not sure one can say it's going to change the face of the world. The concept of the collaborative economy has gone off in all different directions today. 5 years ago, we were on the eve of a new movement, and from afar, it looked as though everyone was about the same, Airbnb, Uber, these smaller entities, but things have evolved since then. Each sector has become more distinctive. You see delivery people on bicycles in Paris. So there is a service economy on demand, which has nothing to do with the collaborative economy. So things have become more distinctive, moved in different directions. For those who are not familiar with this, how do you differentiate between Uber, Eats, and AMAP? It's not just the legal status. It's not because you're an NGO or a limited liability company that you are more or less collaborative. What is it? Is it the sharing of wealth? Is it governance? There's the issue of governance and structures. sharing wealth. That is in the 1901 non-profit association. Of course, many associations were set up as a form of militancy to combat traditional consumption. There are some entities like La Ruche, qui dit oui. There are people like Uber, it's on-demand services. I'm next to my phone, and I have a service provider who, not just an individual. It's not really a sharing economy, it's a whole service sector. People aren't employees, they work as freelancers, but the economic relationship between me and a delivery man, for example, remains very conventional. It's not a question of a sharing economy or anything else. We're a far cry from that. You speak very quickly and you glossed over an important idea, moving from owning to focus on actual usage, which really was the springboard for the collaborative economy. It's not worth owning a car, you have Autolib. It's not worth owning a bicycle, you have Vélib. Castorama won't be able to sell as many drills because one person will buy a drill and then lend it to others. You can ask your neighbor to share his raclette machine, for example. That's the collaborative economy, but is this all a lie? You won't lend someone your raclette machine? I would do it, but only under the right circumstances. Basically, you said revert to a barter system, as though that was a natural form of trade. Ethnologists and anthropologists have shown that barter isn't a system that works. So systems based on that just don't work because it's a mistake in anthropological terms. It's not a primitive state of an economy. I like it when people talk about barter. It's a kind of a mantra. Yes, usage will replace ownership. We won't have any plants, factories anymore. People will make their own stuff. It's not true. And it won't be as massive as all that. There are some goods that we don't want to own because they're cumbersome. If you live in a big city, it's better if you could do without a car. You don't need a car if you live in Paris, for example. I'm still very grateful to the people who brought me here by car this morning because it's raining. A car is an asset with a lot of constraints. An apartment or Airbnb that works really well, and it's not by chance. Housing is very costly, and if you can amortize it, why not? Now, an automatic drill that you bought for 40 euros at Castorama or Leroy Merlin, a DIY shop, there's less incentive because lending takes time. You have to go and give the tool to the person who's renting it or borrowing it. So there are constraints. So you really have to be strongly motivated. What's the incentive to rent out an automatic drill for 3 euros an hour? You have to really be out of pocket. It takes too much time, and you earn too little money. The platform economic model is to take a percentage, say 10% of each transaction. If it costs 3 euros an hour to rent a drill, well, then you have to rent your drill an awful lot to make it worthwhile. It's worthwhile for assets that last a long time, that are really expensive, that people don't really want to own anymore. But for most of the common objects, I don't think we'll give up ownership. I don't think that's true. However, it does appear that we're moving towards a collaborative revolution in terms of very costly assets. For example, people tend to rent office space for a day. In Paris, there are certain areas which you can rent by the day. Farmers are starting to share machine tools which are really costly. People will share drones, for example. So over and above the price of, say, 2,000 euros, the collaborative economy might really work. I'm not saying that nothing is happening. I'm not saying that the platform economy has no future. But it's not like a wave that's going to carry away everything in its wake. Usage won't replace ownership across the board. What you said about farming is very interesting. I went to the farm fair last year. I looked at the crowdfunding platform for farmers. There are all sorts of sharing and pooling platforms. Things are moving. Things are changing. But you can't make a general statement. I think mobility, for example, should be viewed as a separate field. When it comes to services, if you share everything, the other big promise is that in the future, we'll all be producers and creators of artistic content, educational content. What about that? Do you think things will grind to a halt? We'll all be producers and create artistic content? Boy, producing content, well, despite ourselves, perhaps. Rather than collaborative economy, I talk about the transformation of labor, of work. And I think that's really interesting. Look at the artists, temporary workers, the producers of content. Well, it's hard to find an economic model on the web for artists. For an artist, they get they got royalties from CDs. There were these old-fashioned little disc-like things that you use to listen to music, but you have to sell an awful lot to earn a living. I don't think we'll turn into creators overnight. However, the data we leave on the internet constantly represents increasing value, and we are all workers, so to speak, in the big digital world, digital producers. We don't even realize it through interaction, through our life online, through our consumption patterns online. We have a sort of a digital double which creates value and leaves traces. So often we create even more value there than in the office. We're going to talk about active consumers. Consumers who, through their choices, decide to consume differently. And also, I'll talk about crowdfunding. I, as a consumer, want to invest in this and that. In a few minutes' time, we were supposed to have the ambassador of Kickstarter with us. But it's not Excel, it's somebody else. Kickstarter has created lots of jobs, and in France, a number of people are surfing on this collaborative wave. You announced raising 5 million euros, so collaborative economy works, but these 5 million euros were raised from BNP Paribas, which doesn't function like a kibbutz. They even have set up a real agency, a real office, to be able to propose the various products financed on the platform. You can see the difference there between the collaborative economy and the traditional economy. It's really, the collaborative economy is a sort of an extension of the digital economy. And so it bears the hallmark of a given entrepreneurial culture, traditional access to financing, raising capital, for example, in a traditional way. Usually when you launch a platform, well, the problem with the platform economy is that the value of the platform hinges on the number of participants. Go to BlaBlaCar. If there are only 3 people on the platform has 0 value. So you have to patiently and gradually, like BlaBlaCar, it's taken them 10 years to build up a critical mass of users. So the platform really has an intrinsic value. So you have to race to build up critical mass. You need to be pragmatic. these startups, because these were startups to start with. The platform economy was based on startups. They're not limited liability companies or associations or what have you. So there's always been this sort of halfway house status. So to sum up, before we talk more positively about the collaborative economy, so as not to make everyone feel gloomy, last night he was even worse. Don't talk politics with the guy, otherwise you'll feel depressed for the next half-century. The bubble of the collaborative economy lasted only 4 to 5 years. There were incredible promises in the US. The lending clubs, for example, peer-to-peer lending, which were going to replace traditional banks, but they've been collapsing since the beginning of the year. The bubble went up, grew very quickly, but then burst. I have the impression that people are really waiting for some major novelty which will save us. We are waiting around in these economic theories, which I don't think are at all suited to what's happening now. The liberal economy, the liberal philosophy says nothing about the real economy that exists in the world. You think collaborative economy is better as a term? He was a bit naive, but at least it held out some hope. What attracted us to what people were saying about the collaborative economy was that it really was indicative about the future. It really said something. The problem is we like these concepts which say that a wonderful world is shaping up. Like Marx and Engels and others, they talked about democracy, the end of history, this sort of mystical convergence of the Internet of Things, and so on and so forth. This would create an incredible society. We're very receptive to that kind of discourse in Europe. Post-Hegel, we love these resounding statements which make people dream, but which are usually misguided. The collaborative economy today was a way to speak differently about the digital world, a way not just to transpose the ideology of the Silicon Valley, where entrepreneurs are heroes. The idea was to say something more real, more shared. And it was a lovely time. But now we've entered a different phase. Rather than believing in these sort of gadget-like concepts which help us to dream, Uberization, the collaborative economy, this, that, and the other, it's time to resume to a more political, to resume a more political dimension. These concepts are stimulating, they create a lot of hope, but I think we've reached a point where we need to make digital matters more political rather than relegating them to some different field. I think it's high time to put this all back into a more political framework. I want us to wind up on a more positive note. There are thousands of people who have come here despite the rain. There are a lot of people in Paris, Berlin. There'll be a similar conference in Rio soon. I think there are thousands of people who are willing to travel to listen to these discussions. There are platforms and petitions with thousands and thousands of signatures. We had someone came to talk to us last year here in Le Havre about the principle of not just signing a petition. You want to ensure that there's a real promise which is implemented. So there are some alternatives which are socially and ecologically virtuous. You've been watching this around the world. Can you give us the names of 2 or 3 virtuous platforms?
appétit renouvelé pour les formes de démocratie
People are
participative.
increasingly keen on
Il y a quand même des
participative
révolutions
democracy.
technologiques
There are
qui arrivent, comme
technological
potentiellement la voiture
revolutions
autonome,
coming,
blockchain,
like
qui amènent
self-driving
leur lot
cars,
qui
blockchains.
suscitent à leur tour un certain espoir, et un espoir qui
And
n'est
they
pas
give rise to
injustifié à mon
hope,
sens.
and this hope is fairly
Aujourd'hui, il y a
justified
pas mal
in
de
a
questions
way.
qui se posent aussi sur
There are
la
many
réinvention de la
issues
protection
in
sociale
terms
pour
of
réintégrer les travailleurs
social
indépendants qui sont de plus
welfare
en plus nombreux demain.
and the
Peut-être que se
self-employed,
libérer du salariat et se libérer du travail à plus long terme, avec quelque chose comme
perhaps
le revenu
freeing
universel,
oneself of
sont des raisons de s'enthousiasmer. Donc oui, il se passe des choses, enfin, il y a des mouvements intéressants. Si vous voulez
salary-based
regarder, moi, je pense notamment
work
à un
in the
mouvement qui est un
future.
petit peu la post-économie collaborative, qui est intéressant, qui
The
est porté
post-collaborative
notamment par un
economy
professeur
is
de
beginning to
New
take
York qui s'appelle
shape.
Trevor
New
Short,
York
c'est par un
professor called Trevor Short has talked about it.
Schneider,
He
qui
used to
s'appelle,
work on Wall
qui
Street,
eux aujourd'hui s'intéressent en fait à la question
and
du
he's
coopérativisme de plateforme.
interested in cooperativism on the platform instead of having a platform which
freelance et qui capitalise
entails freelance work and a capitalistic structure. The idea is to work so that the platform economy functions more like a cooperative. People work hand in hand,
deviennent plus durables.
and this might be more sustainable. Look what's happening with platform cooperativism. There are some very stimulating things worth looking up in that respect. And do you have a second example?
Sur une thématique intéressante, je travaille pas mal avec les gens de la ruche qui disent aujourd'hui, qui cherchent en ce moment, alors même que c'est une boîte qui dit oui, pas de VC tout à fait traditionnel, qui cherchent aujourd'hui un mécanisme pour partager le capital avec les membres du réseau.
With members of the network. It's not all that easy when you're not in a cooperative structure. It's complicated in terms of governance to turn a startup into a cooperative. But basically, they're trying to get participants to take a share in the capital. By the end of the year, I think we'll have interesting news in that respect. And it's a worthwhile precedent. It might bring the platform economy into make it more desirable, make it look somewhat different. Thank you very much.
Pour une fois, on n'est pas à la bourre. Est-ce qu'il y a une ou deux questions?
For once, we're not late. Any question about the future of collaborative economy?
Ouais, je devrais la répéter parce que c'est enregistré, mais allez-y.
Question is being asked off mic, but will be repeated into the microphone so that the interpreter can translate.
Il y a 4 ans, un peu plus de 4 ans maintenant.
The answer is 4 years ago. The interpreter is sorry, but everything is taking place out of the mic. We can't hear in the booth.
Il faut juste la répéter pour l'enregistrement. Donc, est-ce qu'on peut revenir aux origines de
l'économie
collaborative?
Can we get back to the origin of collaborative economy? Was it born for more reason to overcome the crisis, or was there an opportunity because people had gone poorer and it made it possible for them to consume for less money? This is the reason why we fairly quickly abandoned the idea of sharing economy, because the idea of sharing called on a number of concepts from a moral point of view that was more loaded, and we thought collaborative was a more neutral way of saying, and we didn't have to wonder whether we did that because of financial interest or because of altruism. This is a question that's often asked, but as you said, you did it for both reasons. It's interesting to note that whatever is linked with economic reason and for social reason, tend to exclude each other. It's actually both. Sometimes I do it because I like to meet people, and otherwise, on other days, because I don't want to pay for 150 euros for a room in a hotel that I won't like. We should get away from the idea that individual interest and human interest are opposing notions.
Dans la société, donc de plus jamais se poser cette question, de se demander si on était un moment T, un agent économique.
Wonder about whether we are an economic agent or a citizen. We are both all the time because we do not live.
Notre être n'est pas scindé par les
Our
disciplines.
being is not divided into several boxes.
On peut en prendre une deuxième? Oui.
Maybe a second question?
Alors la question était,
The question was,
de repolitiser
what
le
does
numérique?
it mean to repoliticize the digital world? There's a book, The End of Hierarchies, La fin des hiérarchies, 10 euros by OuiShare. I didn't even bring any to sell them. Such a bad seller. And the other question will be answered by Arthur.
Déjà, il s'agit de faire
There's several things. First of all, the digital question has to be made an element in the political debate, and I don't get the feeling that's the most important element right now. The collaborative Burkini, maybe we could set up platforms to sell them. There are a number of things that can be created. I'm happy you launched this debate, Vincent.
Voilà l'exemple de pourquoi on ne peut pas en parler.
This is why you can't talk about these things.
Un exemple tout bête. Aujourd'hui, en fait, j'entends très souvent un truc.
Very often I hear something, I hate that technology is neutral. Technology is an abstraction, is neutral because it is an abstraction, but a given technology is not neutral. It's not a given. It's created by people in a historical, social context. This tablet, this is not a neutral technology. This is a technology that made to give me a number of contents, to register some data about me. This is fairly political in itself. And what's at stake for me right now? And I know that Vincent likes him a lot, Matthew Crawford, who has an interesting critic from a phenomenological point of view on technology. What's at stake is to try and create forms of technologies that do not make us ectoplasmic creatures, passive creatures, cut away from the world that auto-consume themselves in a way. How do we recreate shared attention? How do we recreate linked relationship between people through technology instead of having them entrapped into closed retroaction consuming loops? How do we create technologies that reflect the political ideal towards which we want to go? Another interesting question.
Le retour du travail indépendant et le détricotage par le haut
partial return of independent work, the loss of some aspects of working conditions. What can do in this area? These are questions we must ask ourselves. I confirm what Arthur said about Matthew Crawford, éloge du carburateur in French. It's really very interesting. One last question, maybe? Is everybody happy with the answers? No, I think that's it.
Merci beaucoup, Arthur.
Thank you very much, Arthur.
Te rasseoir.
You can go back to your seat.
Alors, si tu peux rester dans le coin, comme ça, je crois que vers 11h, il y a un meet de speakers. Et donc, on va passer directement
Please stick around. There's a meet a speaker session around the 11.